In all the years that I've been doing photography, I realized that the more I learn, the more there is for me yet still to learn. And that's actually one of the joys of photography. It's a journey that will stay with us for the rest of our lives. Whatever the kind of photography it is that we're doing, there's always new things to learn, new techniques, or new technology develops, which opens new doors and new things to learn. However, over the years that I've been teaching photography in workshops, there are a handful of things that I find myself repeating more often than anything else. So this video is about the 6 most useful things that I've learned while doing landscape photography. Buy the best tripod that you can afford. Photography can be a really expensive hobby, and it can be really tempting when you're starting out to try to save a little bit of money on something like the tripod, because a good tripod is incredibly expensive. It can cost you anything from $600 upwards. But to do that is always going to be a false economy, because you'll buy the cheaper tripod, and then maybe you'll buy a slightly better tripod. But at some point, sooner or later, as you continue with photography, you're going to realize that you need a really good carbon fiber tripod. So you're going to invest in one sooner or later. It's just cheaper, and you save a lot more money to invest in it as soon as possible. This is a Gitso Series 2 Mountaineer. Now, I bought this 11 years ago. I bought it when I was using a Nikon D3, and after that I used it with a Nikon D800, and then I switched to Fuji, and it was used with an X-T1, and after that it's been used with my X-T2 along with the Gitso Traveler, which is what is holding up the camera for this video. Now, the thing is that tripod has lasted me 4 cameras, and what you realize is that the tripod is going to be the piece of equipment that you will own for the longest period of time. It's the best value thing that you can ever buy. So buy a really good one, and it will last you forever. Don't be put off by failure. In fact, I know it's a cliche, but failure is the best way to learn. In fact, it's probably the only way to learn. We learn by making mistakes. We make mistakes, and then we get better and do it better next time. But beyond that, we need to embrace the fact, or at least live with the fact, that most of the shots that we do and most of the times we go out shooting, we're not going to come back with a mind-blowing image or something that's incredible or that we're going to remember forever. Unfortunately, with landscape photography, that's just the way that it is. Most of the shots that we take are not going to be anything special, and that applies to anyone from a beginner all the way up to a professional. Now, I really wouldn't like to try to estimate the fraction of the images that I keep against the images that I've taken in my career, but it's certainly going to be something like 0.0000 something, and maybe more zeros, because the reality is that the vast majority of images that I take I don't keep. I'm not going to keep because they're just not good enough for one reason or another. They don't have that factor that makes me go, wow. They're not something that a year later or 2 years later I look back on and think, oh, that really captured the scene there. Failure is the norm in landscape photography, and that's a good thing, because if we got it right most of the time, there wouldn't be anything else to learn. There'd be no challenge. It would be too easy. So when I see images taken from other photographers, particularly from locations that I've been to, and they managed to see something that I didn't see, or they captured the place in a way that I wasn't capable of doing, that's actually a positive thing. It's an inspiring thing, and it's an encouraging thing, because it makes you realize that there is room to grow. There's more to learn. And as I said at the beginning of this video, photography is a journey that lasts us forever. We're always going to be learning. And it would be a terrible thing if there were nothing left to learn. And it would be a terrible thing if we weren't inspired by other images that have got something that ours currently haven't, because it gives us something to strive for and something to aim for. And in doing that, we need to embrace the fact that we're going to fail sometimes. So this is a practical tip for shooting in the field, and one that we always try to incorporate into workshops, and that is to get to the location where you're going to be shooting as early as possible. But not only that, do as much research beforehand as you can. So look at things like Google Earth to try to find the location, certainly if it's a location that you've never been before, to get an idea of what it is that you're going to find there. Use apps like the Photographer's Ephemeris to try to find out what the light's going to be doing. Check what the tides are going to be doing if you're shooting on the coast, whether the tide's going to be coming in, whether it's going to be going out, where it's going to be at the time you're going to be shooting, and then get to the location as early as possible. So you have time to explore it, to walk around, to try a few frames, to try different compositions and find a spot. So when the light is at its absolute peak, you've had the opportunity to find the composition that you're really satisfied with to make the most out of a scene. I can't tell you how many times I've been frustrated when for one reason or another I've not been able to get to a location particularly early, so I've not really had a lot of time to explore the scene. So you do some shots and yeah, they're okay, you know, you get back home, but then a few weeks later or a few months later, you see some other shots from the same location and you realize that if you just walked a little bit further, if you'd just gone around that pile of rocks, there was a much better composition waiting for you. So always give yourself the time to explore a location as much as possible before you start shooting seriously. Now, why you should invest in the best tripod that you can afford. Conversely, with the camera, you shouldn't worry too much about the specs or buying the very best camera that you can get or the very best camera that's on the market, because you don't need the very best camera to take good images. Now, there is a myth that professional photographers will always use the best quality equipment available at the time, but it's actually not true. Now, let me give you a few examples. Back in the film days, the very best quality that you could find would be in large format or medium format, but some of the most famous and best known landscape photographers of the time were shooting on 35mm film. For example, Art Wolf. This is a book, beautiful book, images printed incredibly large, all shot on 35mm film. Franz Lanting is another one, and Galen Rell, who is perhaps one of the godfathers of modern adventure photography. Now, if you read any of Galen Rell's articles, he was a huge advocate in traveling as light as possible. So he would quite often not take the very best quality lenses, the f2.8, the super sharp lenses, but carry something lighter and smaller because he felt that it helped him to create better images. Back up your images. In fact, back them up multiple times in multiple different places, because you can hope that it never happens to you, and it may never happen to you, but if you ever do have a drive fail, those images are gone, and they're gone for good. It's kind of like having a seatbelt in a car. You hope that you're never going to use it, but you're always going to put it on. It's just good to know that it's there. Now, different photographers have different ways of backing up their images, but a basic rule is you should have at least one or more copies on external hard drives outside, away from your computer, and other copies off-site or in the cloud. Now, because most of my work is done on a laptop, I actually don't keep any images on the laptop. The only images that are there are ones that are just after I've imported from a card or from my camera, and those are backed up in multiple drives using Time Machine backup on my computer. But as soon as I finished editing those images, they're then moved onto a mirrored hard drive, which is on the Wi-Fi network in my apartment. So the drive is mirrored and I can access them from within Lightroom, so I can still make small edits and I can easily pull them off to export them for print or to send to the web. And that's my first line of backup, and there's a slight redundancy there because the drive is mirrored, but that's not enough. Those drives are then mirrored with two external hard drives, which I keep in the flat. Okay, so the final tip is perhaps the most important, and that is always shoot for yourself and take the images that you want to take and that you enjoy taking, because at the end of the day, photography should give you pleasure. Both the act of taking the images, of being out there in nature and operating the camera, trying to capture what it is that you're seeing in front of you, to the final product, to the final edited image that you've got. All of this is a process that should be fun and should be enjoyable, and that's the most important thing. Now, criticism is important and it can be a valid way to learn, but understand that a lot of the criticism that you get is from people telling you about how they would take the image and what they would like to see, and that isn't necessarily the same as what you want. It doesn't necessarily match with your vision. So while criticism can benefit you, and it can help you learn, it's not always something that you need to listen to. Photography, it is a process, and we do expect to progress and we do expect to improve, but you need to consider what improvement actually means, because improvement should be that you are much more capable of taking the images that you like, that communicate the scene in the way that you want to communicate it. And that's something that mostly will come from inside of you and that will come from practice.